corpse starch. Yes, that most appetizing of grey nutritional pastes, the crown jewel, as it were, of imperial cuisine, lovingly rendered from only the finest recycled corpses the Imperium has to offer. I'm sure that all of you will have heard of it. Some of you may laugh at the thought of it, others will be annoyed by how unreasonable it may seem and will argue that it should be left on the sidelines, while others still will find it a very rational and thematically appropriate use of limited resources. But it doesn't really matter because corpse starch is everywhere, right? It's the staple of the imperial, let alone hive-bound masses of humanity. A nutrient-rich miracle gloop served by the ladleful to the hungry, the obedient, and the too tired to care. Loyal citizens across the galaxy slurp it down daily, not because they enjoy it necessarily, but because that's what good citizens do when there's nothing else on the menu. It's a harsh galaxy, after all. Does this all sound about right? Well, I hope not, because it shouldn't. There's a tendency to picture the average imperial life through a lens of absolute, all-defining misery. It's a tendency, I find, that mirrors how most will picture the average life of one in the Terran Middle Ages. Rampant disease, rotting teeth, open sores and spoiled food, stink, flies, mud, obese lords and a starved populace, a world lacking in colour, everything being some shade of grey, brown or black. But like many stereotypes, this picture misses the mark. The Middle Ages, while definitely lacking many of the modern comforts that we all take for granted daily, were not entirely backwards, grim, bleak and depressing. When resources or opportunity allowed, homes were painted and clothing was dyed. Colour had meaning, status, and symbolism. Personal hygiene wasn't unknown either. People of all classes commonly washed hands and faces in basins or rivers, especially in the mornings and before and after meals. Baths were taken, soap existed, so did drainage systems and running water in some cities, castles, and townships. Teeth were cleaned with splayed twigs stuck with cloves and padded with wool cloth. Bedding was changed regularly and often sprinkled with herbs like basil, lavender, and mint, albeit the nice smells of such herbs only being a welcome side effect to a strategy aimed at keeping rats and mice away. But most relevant for this video, medieval food wasn't just bland gruel either. Even the average peasant or serf had access to bread, stews, pottages, veggies like beans, cabbages or leeks, and meat like beef or mutton. In both cases, in the life of the average imperial citizen and that of the average medieval person, the reality of daily life, and especially diet, is far more complex than the popular image or stereotype will suggest. So what is true for the average medieval peasant in this instance is just as true, if not more so, for the average Joe Imperium. Corpse starch does exist. It is a thing. It is a processed, nutrient-dense paste made from human remains and distributed or issued across some parts of the Imperium. But it is not the Imperium's primary food source. Yes, it is mass-produced. Yes, it may be distributed widely, particularly in overpopulated hive worlds and war zones. Yes, there are entire planets whose sole function is the reclamation and rendering of the dead. Yes, it likely forms a staple for lowest classes in some regions, and it may be included as a base ingredient in broader ration packs, either stored for civil emergencies or issued to militia or frontline forces. But this does not make it universal, nor does it make it prevalent enough to be considered anything close to the average meal for Joe. The Imperium is not made of billions, it is not even made of trillions, it is made of quadrillions. Quadrillions of humans spread across a star-spanning empire of near incomprehensible scale. For corpse starch to truly be the primary foodstuff of humanity, the required infrastructure would be staggering, if not total. Agri-worlds would not be growing grain, algae, living meat or other vat-grown proteins and such. They would instead be planets covered in continent-sized charnel pits, harvesting the human dead on a nightmarish industrial scale just to keep the living fed. Oceans of slurry, fields of stacked corpses, and this wouldn't be a gross outlier either. Instead, it would have to be the baseline norm. In fact, I would say that a civilization built to rely on variants of corpse starch would almost definitely require more recycled human corpses than the same civilization could hope to produce. Maybe someone can do the math on this. But this is not what we see, because this is not what exists. Corpse starch is not the foundation of imperial nutrition. It is not a household staple. It is not even that normal. It is instead a stopgap, or a supplement, or a compromise. It is what's used when other food sources are cut off, too expensive, or too far away to matter. It is food, quote unquote, when there is no other food on the table. Corpse starch's exaggerated place in the community imagination likely comes down to novelty, and maybe more than that, to language. It's a term that has slipped into common vocabulary the same way military slang often does. Just as soldiers have long referred to disliked rations as dog biscuits, vomlets, or sea rats, the label corpse starch may be thrown around by imperial forces as shorthand for anything bland, suspect, or just gross, regardless of its actual ingredients. The simple truth is that food in the Imperium is wildly diverse and hard to define. And yes, I hate that I have to keep repeating this in every single one of these average life videos, but get used to it because it's annoyingly true. The Imperium is made up of a million isolated and often wildly disconnected worlds. There are few meaningful averages to create or draw from. But we can still extrapolate, we can still look at patterns and look at the sources, and in doing so, I'll always do my best to paint the most accurate picture that I can. So let's take a societal approach to this. Let's go from the top down, looking at exactly what's being shoveled into the face holes of every tier of imperial society. We'll start, of course, with the highborn, the nobility and the ruling class. Watchers of the Throne gives us some good insight to get us started. All of it was real. Fruits conveyed from the farthest reaches of the segmentum in cryotanks. I felt the tight berries burst in my mouth as I chewed. One of those alone would have bought a hive spire on a lesser world, but we were on Terra, at the top of the pyramid, and barely gave it a thought. And books like The Iron Kingdom, Apocalypse, and Sea of Souls describe similar bounties and feasts for those of the upper strata. Fine meats, luscious fruits and vegetables, venison and gravy, crustaceans, processed grains, slices of native cheese. This is what passes for ordinary among the elite. Genuine, often exotic meats, not vat-grown protein or offcuts of groks. They get the rare cuts, the best cuts, hunted or well-raised, frozen fruits and veggies shipped frozen from distant agri-worlds or grown locally in manicured, carefully monitored farms and climate-controlled biodomes. Nuts, berries, wine, artisan cheeses, spiced sauces, dishes served by hand, plated in silver, paired with priceless vintages, more expensive than most dare to guess. And for a better understanding of this, maybe pause here and have a go watching my very own video on the life of the average noble, link in the description. In short, the highborn eat real quality food, not paste, not bars, not bricks, actual meat, actual fruit, actual bread. It's grown, harvested, frozen, and ferried in from off-world, almost certainly guarded by armed escorts, just so it can be dumped on a plate in front of someone who may not even finish it, let alone consider the cost of the priceless bounties that they are inhaling. A delicious resource that most would kill for, wasted on the overindulged and the disinterested. And this is a real power move, honestly. The ability to dine on fresh, high-quality food in a galaxy propped up by ration bars, nutrient sludge, and scavenged scraps is a deliberate outward-facing display meant to remind everyone beneath you that you are not one of them. You are above them, and exceptionally so. Because in a civilization where most people can't remember the last time they tasted something that wasn't shelf-stable or synthetic, eating fresh fruit, real meat, and imported delicacies is a political statement. Whether actively recognized or not, it's just another weapon in the arsenal designed to keep them elevated and to keep the jackals from nipping too hard at their heels. But that's just the tippy top. Let's keep going down. While the Astartes may be satisfied to fuel their transhuman bodies with nothing more than amino porridge and triglyceride gel, the wider military apparatus of the Imperium, namely the Astra Militarum, operates with a broader culinary range, especially when rank and status come into play. Officers of the Guard and the Navy, commissars, along with senior arbites, enjoy privileges that, when supply lines are stable, bring them sort of within the realm of noble dietary standards. I'm talking about mashed eggs and grilled ham with tough toasted chunks of wheat bread. I'm talking about crisp bread and stewed berries, smoked fish and palavine pastries. Hot meals, texture, taste, potential for real ingredients, occasionally even fresh. This is what rank buys you in the Imperium. Not just command over squads or regiments, but a seat at a better table, in a better mess. Even if some or most of it is preserved, dehydrated, tinned, or frozen, it still passes as a proper meal by the time an officer would see it, often prepared by actual trained cooks, or at least by servitors and machines designed to imitate them. That said, even distinguished officers have to tango with ration packs eventually, especially when things go sideways, but we will get to that very soon. For the rest, for the average guardsman, well, things aren't so exciting, but they're still definitely a few steps above plain corpse starch levels. Rations of varying quality are usually the go. Most guardsmen make do with these alone, depending on supply chains, campaign location, and how far down the Munitorum's priority list their regiment sits. But even then, rations are often supplemented by whatever a soldier can scrounge, steal, trade, or otherwise acquire on the side. On-world, that might mean local wildlife, edible plants, fruits, roots, or whatever the native population isn't using or can be convinced to part with. Off-world, it's whatever you can beg, borrow, or smuggle. A fistful of stolen spices, a cut of contraband meat, or a dash of something unlabeled. After all, we must remember that the finest brews of rot gut are said to owe their kick to a healthy splash of thruster coolant. Anything to add taste, texture, or weight to the otherwise predictable monotony of issued meals. These meals, Imperial Guard ration packs, can range from bland nutrient bars and dense carb bricks to more elaborate ready-to-eat packs and tins filled with things like variations of gelatinous marbled meats and dehydrated veggies, rice, or other grains. Company cooks will do their best to improvise what's on offer when they can, but quality varies and most rations are, of course, designed to last and to feed, not necessarily to impress. One of the most well-known entries in the Guard food catalogue is slab, a heavily processed, protein-dense meat substitute explained well in Against the Grain, as well as the short story of their lives in the ruins of their cities, which we will look at in a sec. Slab is essentially engineered for one purpose: to keep you alive. Cheap to produce, hard to spoil, easy to transport, very unexciting. Slab is pretty gruesome stuff. Pressure treated down from any and all nutritional sources by the Munitorum, it has no discernible flavour apart from a faint mucousy aftertaste, and it looks like grey-white putty. In fact, years before at Schola Progenium on Ignatius Cardinal, an acquaintance of Gaunt's had once kneaded some of it into a form that authentically resembled a brick of plastic explosive, complete with fuses, and then carried out a practical joke on the master of the Scholar arsenal that was notable for both the magnificent extent of the disruption it caused and the stunning severity of the subsequent punishment. Slab is the bureaucratic machine that is the Imperium doing the bare minimum to keep a body standing and shooting. You flavour it with whatever you can, then you shovel it down and hope it stays put. And that's to be the expectation for most of your fighting life. And yet, this is still a step above what much of the wider population gets, because while the Guard at least has the excuse of strategic and military value, that being trained soldiers needing fuel to fight the Emperor's most righteous wars, the working classes and those below them do not get the same consideration. Lower middle hive labourers, manufactorum, drones, serfs and other workers, they get what's available, what's issued, what's cheapest to make, easiest to move, and longest to store. They get whatever they can afford to get their hands on in whatever environment they find themselves in. But still, here too there is variety, born less from abundance and more from necessity. In Sea of Souls, we are told that the average hive dweller in the Imperium subsists on protein sludge and the occasional carb slab. A pretty rough picture, probably in line with what most imagine, and likely very much accurate when scaled across the population density of most hive cities. Such food options are well placed to keep a worker just functional enough to report to shift and not die or pass out on the way there or during. But the Hollow Mountain mentions commonplace protein sticks, no doubt some variation of real or artificial jerky, while Bloodlines from the Crime series makes reference to a kebab shop of sorts, serving blackened piles of heavily fried meat onto oily looking flatbread. Nothing particularly elegant or refined, definitely not regulated and likely very questionable in origin, but it fills a plate, goes for a handful of credits or thrones, and packs the belly with something that might not be good for you, but it counts as food all the same, and makes it worthy for a slap or two. These are meals made in the margins, perfectly suited to hive worlds, forge worlds, and maybe the more run-down corners of civilized worlds. But let's take a step away from the city and look out to the fields of agri-worlds, where food production is local and dependency on imports is lower. Most of the harvest is shipped off-world under strict tithe obligations, but what's left behind, the scraps essentially, can often support a small regional diet. Well, on the less hellish worlds of this classification anyway. Roasted zorn cob, boiled durner beans, alpaca stew, and taisenberry pie. That's the favourite meal of the special wide-eyed agri-world farm boy in 15 hours, and it sounds alright to me. Just please don't ask me how things end for that same farm boy. But even here, even on the bottom rungs of rural simple living, there's still further to fall. And there's one more tier we need to look at. The true bottom, the underhive and the outcasts, freaks and forgotten who scrape by within it. As is explained in Necromunda, Gangs of the Underhive. Food in the underhive rarely holds any joy. Most meals consist of corpse starch or Nutri-Slime, supplemented with synth fats and vitamin shots. As such, anyone who can produce real food from the local flora and fauna can expect a steady stream of credits. This is where corpse starch takes center stage, not as a galactic staple as you may hear elsewhere, not as some grand solution to feeding quadrillions, but as a product of last resort. In the underhive, where infrastructure is broken and logistics are non-existent, corpse starch becomes the standard, not because it's efficient, not because it's celebrated, but because it stores well and it doesn't go off. It's mixed into Nutri-Slime to give it weight, stirred into recycled broth to add bulk. It's something to be supplemented with glowing fungus, questionable algae, or juicy rodents, or juicy man flesh. Down in the underhive, food is what can be found, killed, or scraped off a wall. Nutritional value is often secondary to whether or not it will kill you outright, and if it doesn't, well, then it's good enough to risk eating. And on that note, let's go back to the central point of this video. What is the average meal in the Imperium? There isn't one. Thanks for watching. Nah, I'm just joking. It's true, there is a wide variety of food for all levels of Imperial society. But if we keep population density front of mind, then we're forced to accept that the average life in the Imperium likely plays out on a hive world. And so we are somewhat forced to go back to that quote from Sea of Souls. The average hive dweller in the Imperium subsists on protein sludge and the occasional carb slab. That's it. That's the average. You may get a slice of fried meat, probably grox or some form of rat if you're lucky, industrious, or otherwise well off. You may stretch some flavor out of a scavenged root, some protein sticks, or smuggled powder, but for most people in the Imperium, the average meal is to be sludge and slabs. At least it's not corpse starch, hey? Anyway, thanks for watching. Dystopian Chimp, out.